The scorching Arizona asphalt burned through Warrior's fur as he lay broken on the roadside. Blood pooled beneath his shattered body, his once proud German shepherd frame now twisted at unnatural angles. Through fading consciousness, he watched the red pickup truck, his owner's truck, disappear around the bend, taillights vanishing like dying stars. The betrayal hurt worse than his mangled leg. Each labored breath sent daggers through his chest. Cars blurred past, their wind making his fur ripple. None stopped. Nobody cared about another abandoned dog left to die. Warrior's military training had prepared him for pain, for endurance, for loyalty, but not for abandonment. Not like this. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, a final set of headlights approached, slowing this time. Friend or foe, it didn't matter anymore. His eyes closed as gravel crunched under stopping tires. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. James Thornton gripped his steering wheel tighter than necessary, his weathered hands bearing the calluses of his former life as an Army Ranger. At 35, the desert heat of Phoenix's outskirts reminded him too much of Afghanistan, memories he'd spent 3 years trying to bury since his discharge. His divorce papers, finalized last month, sat unopened in his glove compartment. Another failure, another goodbye. His modest ranch-style home waited for him in a quiet suburb where neighbors kept to themselves, just how he liked it. Except for Martha Wilkins, the 72-year-old widow next door. She'd bring him casseroles with the persistent kindness of someone who'd seen too much death to let the living suffer alone. She'd served as a military nurse in Vietnam, and somehow that shared understanding of war's aftermath made her presence tolerable when no one else's was. James's job interviews had gone nowhere today. "Thank you for your service," they'd say, then hire someone younger, someone without the 1,000-yard stare that made civilians uncomfortable. His savings wouldn't last through summer. 2 miles from home, the sun hung low, painting the desert in bloody hues. That's when he saw it, a shape on the roadside that didn't belong. In the same neighborhood but worlds apart in circumstance, Dr. Sarah Mitchell had just finished a 14-hour shift at Desert Paws Emergency Veterinary Clinic. At 38, she'd built walls around herself as impenetrable as the clinic's concrete foundation. Her colleagues respected her surgical skill but kept their distance from her carefully maintained emotional fortress. Few knew about the diamond ring she still wore on a chain beneath her scrubs. Her fiancé had died 6 years ago in Afghanistan, taking her capacity for attachment with him. Sarah's phone would ring soon. It always did, after she'd finally made it home. Meanwhile, Frank Miller sat in a dingy bar on the outskirts of town, his 4th whiskey burning down his throat. His reflection in the mirror behind the bottle showed a stranger, a 37-year-old husk with hollow eyes. The dog tags under his shirt felt like they were choking him. The nightmares were getting worse. His service dog was supposed to help with that, but nothing helped anymore. Nothing except the rage that kept the fear at bay. The same rage that had made him do what he did today. James slowed his pickup, squinting through the windshield at the dark shape on the roadside. His first instinct was to drive past. Another driver would stop, someone with less baggage, someone who still cared. He'd seen enough broken bodies in Kandahar to last a lifetime. But his hands betrayed him, pulling the wheel right. The truck's tires crunched on gravel as he stopped 30 feet away. James sat motionless, fingers still gripping the wheel. Through the side mirror, he watched the shape, definitely an animal, struggle to raise its head at the sound of his engine. "Damn it," he whispered, reaching for the flashlight in his glove box. The divorce papers fell out. He shoved them back inside. The evening air hit him like an oven when he stepped out. Heat rippled from the asphalt as he approached cautiously. The flashlight beam revealed a German shepherd, its coat matted with blood and dust. One front leg twisted at an impossible angle. Military instincts kicked in as James assessed. Broken leg, possible internal bleeding, still conscious but fading. The dog's eyes, intelligent, pain-filled eyes, locked onto his. No collar. James crouched, keeping his movements slow. "Easy there, boy. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog growled weakly, then whimpered as the effort caused more pain. "James? Everything all right?" Martha Wilkins stood at the edge of her front yard in a floral housecoat, her thin white hair catching the last sunlight. Her house sat just 50 yards from where he'd pulled over. "Got an injured dog here, Martha. Hit and run, looks like," James called back, not taking his eyes off the animal. Martha's screen door slammed as she hurried toward them, surprising agility in her 72-year-old frame. "Lord have mercy," she said, kneeling beside James despite her arthritic knees. "This poor creature." "Need to get him to a vet," James said, already knowing he couldn't afford it. His last paycheck had covered rent with barely enough left for groceries. Martha gently placed her papery hand on the dog's flank. "I know a place. Desert Paws Emergency Clinic. My friend's daughter works there, Dr. Mitchell. I'll call her right now." While Martha made the call, James slipped off his belt, fashioning a makeshift muzzle. The dog watched him warily but didn't resist. "Sarah says bring him immediately," Martha reported, tucking her phone away. "She'll be waiting." "An ambulance would be better," James said. Martha shook her head. "They said it would be an hour wait. He might not have that long." James swore under his breath. "My truck's filthy." "I have blankets in the house," Martha said, already moving, "and towels for the bleeding." 10 minutes later, they had created a nest of blankets in James's truck bed. Moving the dog was excruciating, for both the animal and James, whose combat-trained ears had never gotten used to the sound of pain. The German shepherd whimpered once, then went eerily silent as they lifted him. "I'm coming with you," Martha insisted, climbing into the passenger seat before James could object. The 20-minute drive to Desert Paws stretched James's nerves to breaking. Every bump in the road made him wince, imagining the dog's pain. Martha kept turning around to check on their patient through the back window. "He's still breathing," she reassured. "German shepherds are tough. Military uses them for a reason." "I know," James replied quietly, memories of the K-9 units in Afghanistan surfacing unbidden. The clinic's bright lights flooded the parking lot as James pulled in. A woman in scrubs waited at the entrance, her dark hair pulled back severely, expression all business. 2 technicians with a stretcher followed her. "I'm Dr. Mitchell," she said briskly, not waiting for introductions. Martha called ahead. James watched as they transferred the dog to the stretcher. Under the harsh lights, the animal looked worse, ribs showing through his coat, old scars visible beneath the new injuries. "Someone's been mistreating him long before today," Dr. Mitchell observed, her clinical tone doing little to hide her disgust. "No chip or collar?" "Nothing," James confirmed. "Bring him in," she instructed the technicians. To James and Martha she added, "You'll need to fill out paperwork. As finders, you'll be responsible for decisions and costs unless an owner comes forward." The reality of his financial situation hit James hard. "I can't," he began. "We'll figure something out," Martha interrupted, her thin hand squeezing his forearm with surprising strength. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and fear. James paced while Martha filled out forms, her arthritic hand moving slowly across the pages. An hour passed before Dr. Mitchell returned, surgical mask hanging around her neck, her expression carefully neutral. "Broken front leg, 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and signs of previous abuse," she reported. "He's stabilized but needs surgery immediately. The leg—" She hesitated. "We'll try to save it, but I can't promise anything." "How much?" James asked bluntly. Dr. Mitchell named a figure that made him feel ill. "Plus aftercare," she added. James looked away. "I can't afford that. I'm sorry." "He's a military dog," Martha said suddenly. Both James and Dr. Mitchell turned to her. "Look at his ear. That tattoo. I saw enough of them in my nursing days. This isn't just any German shepherd. He's had training." Dr. Mitchell gently lifted the dog's ear on the examining table. Sure enough, a small tattoo was visible. "M87W," she read. "Could be a military ID." "Does that matter?" James asked. Martha's eyes gleamed. "It might. My Herbert, God rest him, his veterans' benefits covered service animals. If this dog served—" "That's a stretch," Dr. Mitchell said doubtfully. "Then we'll stretch," Martha replied firmly. "Meanwhile, you do what you need to do, Dr. Mitchell. I'm good for the deposit." James stared at his elderly neighbor. "Martha, no. James Thornton. I've been saving funeral expenses for 15 years now, and I'm still here. Let me do something useful with it while I'm alive to see it." Dr. Mitchell looked between them. Something in her professional demeanor softened momentarily. "I'll do everything I can," she promised, then turned and pushed through the swinging doors back to surgery. James sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over him. Martha sat beside him, her thin shoulders straight with determination. Outside, the desert night had fallen completely, stars appearing in the vast Arizona sky. "He needs a name," Martha said softly. James thought of the dog's eyes, the intelligence and pain he'd seen there. "Warrior," he said. "His name is Warrior." The waiting room clock ticked past midnight, its sound unnaturally loud in the empty space. James had sent Martha home in a taxi 2 hours ago, despite her protests. She'd left only after extracting his promise to call with any news. Now, he sat alone, elbows on knees, staring at the industrial tile floor. The surgical doors swung open. Dr. Mitchell emerged, her scrubs spattered with blood, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "He's alive," she said, dropping into the chair beside James. "The surgery took longer than expected. We managed to set the leg and stop the internal bleeding." "But," James prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation in her voice. "But he's not out of danger. The next 24 hours are critical." She pushed a stray hair from her face, leaving a smudge on her forehead. "I'll be honest with you. He's been through significant trauma, not just from today. There's evidence of long-term abuse, healed fractures, cigarette burns under his fur." James clenched his jaw. The familiar anger he'd carried home from Afghanistan stirred in his chest, rage at those who harmed the defenseless. "Can I see him?" he asked. Dr. Mitchell nodded, leading him through the sterile hallway to the recovery area. Warrior lay on a padded table, tubes connecting him to various machines. His massive form seemed diminished, vulnerable. The damaged leg was heavily bandaged and braced. "The nerve damage is extensive," Dr. Mitchell explained quietly. "We'll know more when he wakes up, but there's a possibility." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's a possibility he may never regain full use of that leg." James nodded, absorbing the information. He'd seen wounded soldiers make miraculous recoveries and others never walk again. The body's healing was never predictable. "I'll stay," he decided. Dr. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "That's not necessary. We have overnight staff." "I'll stay," James repeated more firmly this time. Something in his tone must have conveyed his determination, because she didn't argue further. Instead, she gestured to a chair in the corner. "I'll have someone bring you a blanket." James settled in for the night, watching Warrior's chest rise and fall. Every few hours, a technician would come check the monitors, adjust the IV. Around 3 a.m., Dr. Mitchell reappeared, surprising James. "Thought you'd gone home," he said. She shrugged. Special case. She checked Warrior's vitals herself, her movements precise. Military dogs are exceptional. Their training makes them fighters. "You sound like you know something about it," James observed. Dr. Mitchell's expression closed off. "I've worked with a few." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "There's coffee in the break room if you need it. Down the hall on the left." By morning, Warrior had stabilized enough that James felt comfortable leaving to shower and change. Martha was waiting on his doorstep when he arrived home, a container of still warm eggs and bacon in her hands. "How is he?" she demanded before James could even get out of his truck. He updated her as they went inside, wolfing down the food at his kitchen counter. It was the first home-cooked meal he'd had in weeks. "I've been thinking about the expenses," Martha said, watching him eat. "I made some calls. If we can verify his military service, there are veteran organizations that help with service dogs." "He's not my dog," James reminded her. "If his owner comes looking—" "His owner left him to die on the road," Martha interrupted sharply. "In my book, that forfeits any claim." James couldn't argue with that. After a quick shower, they returned to the clinic together. Dr. Mitchell was waiting with news. "The infection started overnight," she said without preamble. "We've started him on stronger antibiotics, but it's aggressive." The next 48 hours became a blur of anxiety. Warrior's fever spiked dangerously. James found himself unable to leave, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, eating from vending machines. Martha came and went, bringing him clean clothes and real food. Dr. Mitchell, Sarah, as she'd finally told him to call her during the second night's vigil, worked well beyond her shifts, personally monitoring Warrior's treatment. On the third morning, Sarah called James and Martha into her office. Her face was grave. "The infection has reached the bone," she explained. "The nerve damage is also worse than we initially thought. I've consulted with specialists and—" She took a deep breath. "We need to consider amputation." The word hung in the air between them. "Amputation," James repeated flatly. "It's his best chance for survival," Sarah said. "Three-legged dogs adapt remarkably well, especially ones with his intelligence." "The alternative is continuing to fight the infection, but I'm concerned we're losing that battle. And even if we won, he'd likely never use that leg properly again. It would cause chronic pain." James stood and walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot. The decision felt impossibly weighty. Who was he to make this choice for another living being? Yet the alternative, letting Warrior suffer or possibly die, was unthinkable. "Will he understand?" James asked quietly. "That we're trying to help him?" Sarah's voice softened. "Dogs live in the present more than we do. They don't mourn lost limbs the way humans might. They adapt and move forward." Martha, who had been uncharacteristically silent, reached for James's hand. Her papery skin felt cool against his. "Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to let something go to save the whole," she said. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp, held his. I've seen men die trying to save limbs that couldn't be saved, and I've seen men thrive after accepting their losses. James thought of the soldiers he'd served with, the ones who'd returned with missing parts but intact spirits, and those who'd kept everything physically but lost themselves anyway. Do it, he decided. If it will save him, do it. The financial reality intruded immediately. Sarah outlined the costs: surgery, aftercare, rehabilitation, special equipment. The figure made James's head swim. "I'll manage," he said automatically, though he had no idea how. "I've spoken with the clinic director," Sarah said. "Given the circumstances and the dog's likely military background, we can offer a payment plan, and there's a fund for special cases." Martha nodded approvingly. "I've also reached out to some veterans organizations. Once we confirm his service history, they might help." The surgery was scheduled for that afternoon. James signed the forms, his signature a scrawl of responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. Before they took Warrior in, he spent a few minutes with the dog, who was awake but groggy from pain medication. "Hey there, tough guy," James said softly, crouching beside the table. "You're going to be okay. They need to take your leg to save you, but you're going to be fine." His voice caught unexpectedly. "You're a warrior, right? That's who you are, not what you look like." Warrior's eyes, clouded with pain but still alert, fixed on James's face. His tail thumped once against the table, the first voluntary movement James had seen since finding him. In the waiting room, the hours crawled by. Martha brought a photo album to distract him, showing pictures of her late husband Herbert, who'd lost his leg in Vietnam. "Didn't stop him from dancing at our daughter's wedding," she said proudly, "or playing baseball with our grandkids." Sarah came out once to report that the surgery was proceeding as expected. Her surgical cap was patterned with tiny paw prints, an unexpected touch of whimsy that seemed at odds with her usual demeanor. Finally, as evening settled over Phoenix, Sarah emerged, her face showing fatigue but relief. "He made it," she said. "The leg is gone, but we got ahead of the infection. He's a fighter." "Warrior," James corrected gently. "His name is Warrior." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Yes, he is." She hesitated, then added, "He'll need round-the-clock care for the first few days. The clinic isn't staffed for that level of attention overnight." Martha and James exchanged glances. "I'll take him," James said, surprising himself with his certainty. "You'll need training," Sarah cautioned. "Wound care, medication management, physical therapy protocols." "Then train me," James replied, meeting her gaze directly. Something shifted in Sarah's professional demeanor, a hairline crack in her carefully maintained wall. "I could make home visits to ensure proper care." Martha smiled knowingly between them. "I'll help too, of course. Between the three of us, Warrior will have the best care in Arizona." As they made plans for Warrior's recovery, James felt something he hadn't experienced since before Afghanistan, a sense of purpose, of being needed. It was terrifying and comforting in equal measure. Outside the clinic window, the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Somewhere in that same city, Frank Miller ordered another whiskey, unaware that the dog he'd abandoned was still fighting, unaware that their paths would soon cross again. The first night with Warrior in his home, James didn't sleep. He made a bed of blankets on the living room floor next to Warrior's padded dog bed, a donation from the clinic, and listened to every breath, every whimper. The digital clock on his microwave cast a pale blue glow across the room as the hours ticked by. At 2:17 a.m., Warrior let out a particularly pained whine, and James found himself whispering words he'd once heard a field medic tell a wounded soldier. Pain means you're alive, buddy. Pain means you made it. By morning, James's back ached from the hard floor, but Warrior had made it through the night. The dog's eyes tracked him as he moved around the kitchen, making coffee. The amputation site was heavily bandaged, a stark white reminder against Warrior's tan and black coat. Following Sarah's instructions, James carefully administered pain medication, hiding the pill in a small piece of chicken. "Good boy," he murmured when Warrior reluctantly swallowed. The German shepherd's ears twitched at the praise, but there was still no tail wag, no sign of trust or comfort. Sarah arrived precisely at 9, medical bag in hand, her car pulling into his driveway with military punctuality. She'd traded her clinic scrubs for jeans and a sensible button-down, her dark hair still pulled back severely. The professional distance remained in her manner, but James noticed how her expression softened when she knelt beside Warrior. "Let's see how our patient is doing," she said, her hands gentle as she checked vital signs and examined the surgical site. "The incision looks good, no excessive drainage or redness." "He hardly slept," James reported. "Kept whining." Sarah nodded. "That's to be expected. The phantom limb sensation can be confusing for them." She demonstrated how to clean around the stitches, her fingers brushing against James's as she guided his hand. "Like this. Gentle but thorough." The moment felt strangely intimate, her hand on his, both focused on healing this broken creature between them. James noticed a thin chain around her neck, disappearing beneath her collar, and wondered briefly what hung on it. "He'll need to start moving soon," Sarah continued, professional tone firmly back in place. "Just standing at first, then short walks, building strength on the remaining 3 legs." "Isn't it too soon?" James asked, remembering how soldiers were often kept immobile after major surgeries. "Dogs recover differently than humans," Sarah explained. "Extended bed rest leads to muscle atrophy and depression. Movement, carefully managed, promotes healing." After Sarah left, Martha arrived with groceries and a homemade casserole. "Can't take care of him if you don't take care of yourself," she chided, setting about organizing his kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who'd raised 3 children. When she discovered his nearly empty refrigerator, she clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "James Thornton, how do you expect to get better if you're living on coffee and those awful frozen dinners?" "I'm not the one recovering from surgery," he pointed out. Martha fixed him with a stern look that reminded him powerfully of his grandmother. "Aren't you? Seems to me you've been recovering from something since you moved in next door." James had no answer for that. He busied himself with making space in the refrigerator for Martha's offerings, aware of Warrior's watchful gaze following him around the room. The first week passed in a rhythm of medications, wound care, and small victories. Warrior stood for the first time on day 3. Wobbling dangerously before finding his balance, the absence of his front leg a visible void. James found himself holding his breath, hands hovering nearby, ready to catch the dog if he fell. But Warrior stayed upright for nearly a minute before carefully lowering himself back to his bed, the effort leaving him panting. "That's it," James encouraged, feeling inexplicably proud. "You've got this." Sarah's daily visits became the fixed point around which James organized his hours. She always arrived at the same time, stayed exactly as long as medically necessary, and maintained her professional demeanor. But small changes appeared. A coffee mug left on his counter, a book about canine rehabilitation on his table, once even a potted succulent for his empty windowsill. "Dogs respond well to growing things," she'd said when he questioned it. "Reminds them life continues." By the end of the second week, Warrior was taking tentative steps across the living room. His movements were awkward but determined, each day bringing increased confidence. The physical challenges were evident: relearning balance, building strength in the remaining limbs, navigating a world designed for 4 legs with only 3. But the emotional wounds proved harder to heal. Warrior still flinched at sudden movements. A dropped pan in the kitchen sent him scrambling under the table, trembling. Loud voices from the television triggered anxious panting. And though he now accepted food and medication from James, he remained wary, maintaining careful distance whenever possible. "It's not personal," Martha assured James, finding him sitting on the back patio one evening, watching Warrior sniff cautiously around the small yard. "He's been betrayed by humans. Trust takes time to rebuild." "What if he never trusts me?" James asked, voicing the fear that had been growing alongside his unexpected attachment to the dog. "He will," Martha said with grandmotherly certainty. "Just keep showing up. Consistency is the language of trust." And on the 17th day after surgery, Sarah arrived with news. "I've been researching his tattoo," she said, kneeling to examine Warrior's healing incision. M87W matches a designation system used for military working dogs deployed to Afghanistan between 2015 and 2018. James felt a chill despite the Arizona heat. "Afghanistan?" Sarah nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I've put in requests with military contacts for more information. If we can verify his service, it opens up resources for his ongoing care." That night, James dreamed of Afghanistan for the first time in months. The familiar landscape of dust and mountains twisted into nightmare terrain, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked warnings no one heeded. He woke sweating at 3 a.m., automatically checking Warrior's bed. It was empty. Panic surged through him as he stumbled through the darkened house, calling Warrior's name. He found the German shepherd in the kitchen, standing at the back door, trembling. "You need to go out?" James asked, relief making his voice shaky. Warrior whined softly, and James opened the door, following him into the yard. The desert night was cool, stars brilliant overhead. Warrior limped to the far corner of the yard and urinated awkwardly, still adapting to the 3-legged stance. As they returned inside, James realized this was the first time Warrior had actively communicated a need, a small breakthrough, but significant. "Good boy," he said softly, and was rewarded with the briefest wag of Warrior's tail. The next morning, Sarah arrived with printed exercises for Warrior's rehabilitation. "He needs to build core strength to compensate for the missing limb," she explained, demonstrating gentle stretches. Her clinical demeanor slipped when Warrior voluntarily placed his muzzle in her hand, the first time he'd initiated contact with either of them. The surprise and pleasure in her eyes made her look younger, softer. "He's beginning to trust," she said, quickly composing her expression back to professional neutrality. But James had seen the crack in her armor, a glimpse of the woman beneath the doctor. During the 4th week, James finally ventured to take Warrior beyond the confines of his house and yard. The local park, early in the morning when few people would be around, seemed manageable. Martha insisted on coming along just in case, though her arthritic knees made walking difficult. Warrior approached the outing with military caution, every sense alert as they slowly made their way along the paved path. His 3-legged gait had developed a rhythm now, awkward still, but increasingly confident. Each passing jogger or barking dog in the distance caused his ears to prick and his body to tense, but he didn't bolt or cower. They were resting on a bench when a mother with 2 young children approached. The woman slowed, clearly wanting to let her curious children see the dog, but hesitant about disturbing them. "Is your dog friendly?" she asked James. Before he could formulate a response, was Warrior friendly? He honestly didn't know. Martha answered for him. "He's recovering from surgery, dear. He's a veteran, just like his dad here." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she took in James's muscular build and military bearing, then looked with new understanding at the three-legged German shepherd. "Thank you both for your service," she said with genuine respect. Her children, a boy about 6 and a girl perhaps 4, regarded Warrior with solemn faces. "Does it hurt?" the boy asked, pointing to where Warrior's leg should have been. "It did," James answered honestly. "But he's getting better every day." "My grandpa has a fake leg," the little girl announced. "He says it makes him special." Martha chuckled. "Smart grandpa." As the family moved on, James was struck by the interaction. The woman hadn't shown pity, and the children hadn't been frightened or repulsed. They'd seen Warrior's difference, but accepted it matter-of-factly. It was the most normal he'd felt in a public setting since returning from deployment. On their walk back, a black sedan drove slowly past them, the driver watching with unusual interest. James instinctively positioned himself between the car and Warrior, old combat instincts flaring. Martha noticed his tension. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Probably nothing," James replied, but made a mental note of the license plate anyway. The following days brought new progress. Warrior began sleeping on the bed beside James, rather than on his separate dog bed. He started to respond to basic commands: sit, stay, come, revealing training beneath the trauma. And one afternoon, while James was repairing a leaky faucet, Warrior brought him a tennis ball, dropping it pointedly at his feet. James stared at the offering, socket wrench forgotten in his hand. It was the first time Warrior had initiated play, the first time he'd demonstrated any behavior beyond basic survival and wariness. "You want to play?" James asked, hardly believing it. Warrior's tail gave a tentative wag. Abandoning the faucet, James took the ball and rolled it gently across the floor. Warrior watched it travel, then looked back at James as if confirming this was indeed what humans did with balls. After a moment's consideration, he awkwardly moved to retrieve it, his three-legged gait making the simple task a challenge. But he managed it, bringing the ball back and dropping it again at James's feet. They played like this for nearly 20 minutes, James carefully keeping the ball rolled short and easy. When Warrior finally tired and settled onto his bed, James felt a lump in his throat. Such a small thing, a dog playing with a ball, yet it represented a monumental step in Warrior's recovery, not just physical healing, but the beginning of joy. Sarah confirmed the progress during her next visit, now down to twice-weekly check-ins. "His muscle development is excellent," she noted, running her hands along Warrior's shoulders and remaining front leg. "You're doing everything right." James found himself unreasonably pleased at her approval. "He brought me a ball yesterday," he told her, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Something in Sarah's usually guarded expression opened. "Play is a significant breakthrough," she said. "It indicates he's feeling safe enough to engage in non-survival activities." She hesitated, then added more softly, "It means he's beginning to trust that this is home." Home. The word resonated uncomfortably in James's chest. His house had never felt like a home, just a place to sleep between job interviews and grocery runs. But somehow, in the past month, things had shifted. Martha's casserole dishes in his refrigerator, Sarah's succulent growing on the windowsill, Warrior's toys scattered across the living room floor. The space felt lived in. It felt shared. That evening, scrolling through job listings on his laptop, his savings now critically low after Warrior's medical expenses, James found himself pausing at an ad for a Veterans Outreach Coordinator at the local VA hospital. The position involved connecting returning service members with resources, support systems, and particularly service dog programs. His finger hovered over the application button, a strange anxiety gripping him. It had been so long since he'd felt qualified for anything worthwhile. A warm weight settled against his leg as Warrior lay down beside him on the couch. The simple trust of that contact, the dog choosing closeness when he had the entire house to retreat to, gave James a surge of confidence. He clicked, "Apply." The black sedan appeared again 3 days later while James was walking Warrior around the block. This time it slowed to a stop, and a man in a suit stepped out, approaching with an official-looking badge. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Kevin Webster from Animal Protective Services. We've received a report about a German Shepherd matching this dog's description. Mind if I ask how he came into your possession?" James felt Warrior press against his leg, sensing his sudden tension. He explained about finding Warrior abandoned on the roadside, the emergency surgery, the ongoing care. Webster made notes, his expression neutral. "And you're aware this dog has a registered owner? A Mr. Frank Miller filed a report claiming his service dog was stolen." James's blood ran cold. "Stolen?" He was left to die on the side of the road with a shattered leg. Webster shrugged. "I'm just following up on the report, sir. Mr. Miller has registration papers and claims the dog, which he calls Rex, by the way, ran away during a PTSD episode. He's been searching for him." The injustice of it burned in James's throat. "This dog was abused," he said flatly. "There are cigarette burns under his fur. Old fractures. Ask Dr. Mitchell at Desert Paws. She has all the documentation." Webster made another note. "I'll need to follow up with her. In the meantime, you should know that legally, if ownership is established, you may be required to return the animal." After Webster left, James stood frozen on the sidewalk, Warrior still pressed against him as if sensing his distress. The thought of returning Warrior to someone who had abused him was unthinkable. But the thought of losing Warrior at all, this dog who had somehow become central to his days, his purpose, was equally devastating. Martha was waiting on her porch when they returned, as if she'd sensed something was wrong. James recounted the encounter, his voice tight with suppressed anger and fear. "Over my dead body will that man get his hands on Warrior again?" Martha declared, her frail frame somehow imposing in her righteous indignation. "Herbert didn't fight in Vietnam so people could abuse animals here at home." She insisted they call Sarah immediately. 20 minutes later, Sarah's car pulled into James's driveway, her expression stormy as she marched up to his door with a thick folder under her arm. "I've brought all of Warrior's medical records," she announced without preamble. "Every injury, every sign of previous trauma, fully documented, plus progress reports on his recovery. If this Frank Miller wants to claim ownership, he'll have to explain each and every one of these injuries to a judge." The three of them gathered around James's kitchen table, spreading out medical reports, photographs, and Sarah's detailed notes. Martha made coffee while they strategized, her movements brisk and determined despite her arthritis. "I've also been in contact with a military handler who reviewed Warrior's tattoo information," Sarah added, pulling out additional papers. "If he is indeed a former military working dog, there will be records. Those might help us understand how he ended up with this Miller person." James watched Sarah's focused determination, struck by how personally she was taking this. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked quietly. "It's above and beyond your professional duties." Sarah's hands stilled on the papers. For a moment she seemed to be considering a dismissive response, maintaining the wall she kept so carefully constructed. But then she reached for the thin chain around her neck, pulling it from beneath her shirt. A diamond ring hung from it. "My fiancé was killed in Afghanistan," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "He was a handler for a military working dog unit. The dog, Delta, she survived the attack that killed him. When I heard they were going to euthanize her because she was too traumatized to continue working, I fought to adopt her." "What happened?" Martha asked gently. "Bureaucracy happened. By the time I cut through the red tape, she'd already been put down." Sarah's clinical mask slipped entirely, revealing raw pain beneath. "I couldn't save her. But I can help save Warrior." The moment hung between them, a shared understanding of loss, binding the three humans and the three-legged dog watching them from his bed in the corner. Finally, James reached across the table, his hand covering Sarah's briefly. "We won't let Miller take him," he promised. "Whatever it takes." That night, Warrior woke James with urgent barking, something he'd never done before. Startled from sleep, James found the German Shepherd standing rigidly by the bedroom window, hackles raised, staring into the darkness of the backyard. Outside, a shadow moved near the fence line, then disappeared. Someone was watching the house. The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after James had found Warrior on the roadside. The day had started normally enough: medication for Warrior's lingering pain, a short morning walk, then a few hours spent updating his resume while Warrior dozed nearby. The doorbell rang just after 2 o'clock. James wasn't expecting anyone. Sarah's next checkup was scheduled for tomorrow, and Martha had gone to visit her daughter in Tucson for a few days. Warrior immediately tensed, ears forward, a low rumble building in his chest. "Easy," James murmured, moving cautiously to the front window. What he saw made his stomach drop. A red pickup truck was parked at the curb, the same shade of red he'd glimpsed disappearing around the bend that evening on the highway. A man stood on the porch, shifting his weight impatiently. Behind him, an official-looking sedan was parked behind the truck. Kevin Webster from Animal Protective Services stood beside it, clipboard in hand. Warrior's growl deepened. The sound triggered James's combat instincts, a warning of approaching danger. He took a deep breath, centering himself, then opened the door, positioning his body to block any view of Warrior inside. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the adrenaline surging through his system. "That's him," the man said immediately to Webster, ignoring James completely. "That's my dog. I can hear him." James studied the stranger. Mid-30s, muscular build gone slightly soft, military haircut grown out, hollow eyes that darted nervously, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen combat and brought it home with him. "Mr. Thornton," Webster began formally, "this is Frank Miller. As I mentioned during our previous conversation, he's filed a claim of ownership for a German Shepherd matching your dog's description." "My dog," Frank corrected sharply. "His name is Rex, and he's a registered service animal for my PTSD." He thrust a folder of papers toward Webster. "I've got all the documentation right here." "Mr. Miller," James said, finally addressing the man directly. "The dog I found was abandoned, severely injured, on Route 87 about 6 weeks ago. Left to die in the heat." Frank's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his aggressive facade. "That wasn't... I didn't mean..." He collected himself. "He ran off during an episode. I've been looking everywhere for him." "He didn't run anywhere," James replied coldly. "He had a shattered leg and 3 broken ribs. He was dragged or thrown from a vehicle." Frank's face flushed red. "You calling me a liar? You don't know what happened?" Behind James, Warrior's growling intensified. The sound seemed to trigger something in Frank, whose gaze snapped toward the door, eyes suddenly wild with recognition or fear. James couldn't tell which. "Rex!" Frank called out. "Rex! Come here, boy!" Warrior's growl transformed into frantic barking. The sound was not of recognition or joy, but of terror and rage. "Gentlemen," Webster interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. "Perhaps we could discuss this calmly. Mr. Miller has provided registration documents that appear to be in order. However, Mr. Thornton, your allegations about the dog's condition when found are serious." "They're not allegations," James said firmly. "They're documented medical facts. The dog was treated at Desert Paws Emergency Clinic. Dr. Sarah Mitchell performed the surgery that saved his life, after having to amputate his front leg due to the severity of his injuries." Frank's face paled. "Amputated? What are you talking about?" "Your dog, Rex, as you call him, is now a three-legged dog," James said, watching Frank's reaction carefully. "Thanks to whatever happened the day you claim he ran off." "Let me see him," Frank demanded, taking a step forward. James didn't move. "That's not happening today." Webster cleared his throat. Mr. Thornton, legally speaking, if Mr. Miller can prove ownership—" "I understand the legalities," James interrupted. "I also understand that there's documented evidence of long-term abuse, cigarette burns under his fur, healed fractures that were never properly treated." Frank's expression darkened dangerously. "You think I abused my own service dog? You think I'd hurt the one thing that keeps me functional?" His voice rose with each word, control slipping. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what I see every night when I close my eyes." The outburst hung in the air between them. In that moment, James saw beyond the anger to the broken man beneath, someone fighting demons he couldn't escape. It was a reflection too familiar for comfort. "I was in Afghanistan too," James said quietly. 82nd Airborne. 2 tours. The revelation seemed to briefly deflate Frank's rage. His eyes refocused on James, really seeing him for the first time. "Marines, Helmand Province, Marines. Helmand, 2017-2018. A chill ran through James. The timing aligned with Warrior's suspected military service. "Look," Webster said, clearly relieved at the slight de-escalation, "we need to verify a few things. The chip in the dog should confirm identity, and we need to address these allegations of abuse." "He needs to see the dog's current condition," James conceded reluctantly. "But not today. Not without Dr. Mitchell present to document everything." "Tomorrow," Frank demanded. "I want to see Rex tomorrow." Before James could respond, a car pulled into his driveway. Sarah's practical sedan. She emerged quickly, medical bag in hand, eyes taking in the scene with rapid assessment. "I got your text," she said to James, though he'd sent no message. Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Martha's house next door, where the curtain twitched. Of course. Martha had called her before leaving town, ever vigilant. "Dr. Mitchell," Webster greeted her. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the need for professional documentation." Sarah stepped up beside James, her presence solid and reassuring. "I have all of Warrior's medical records, including detailed documentation of his condition when found, and the abuse indicators we identified." "Warrior?" Frank repeated. "His name is Rex." "His name," Sarah said with professional frost, "is whatever his current caregiver chooses. And given that Mr. Thornton has spent the last 6 weeks providing round-the-clock care, rehabilitation, and thousands of dollars in medical treatment, I'd say he's earned that right." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Webster attempting to mediate between Frank's increasingly agitated demands to see his dog and Sarah's insistence on proper protocols for the animal's well-being. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at Desert Paws," Sarah finally proposed. "Neutral territory. I'll have a behavioral specialist present as well to document the dog's reaction to Mr. Miller, which will be relevant to any custody determination." Frank looked ready to object, but Webster nodded quickly. "That seems reasonable. Mr. Miller, this gives you time to bring any additional documentation supporting your claim." After they finally left, James closed the door and leaned against it, exhaustion washing over him. Sarah set her medical bag down and immediately went to Warrior, who was trembling in the corner of the living room. "How did you know to come?" James asked. "Martha called before she left town. Said she had a bad feeling about that animal services guy." Sarah ran her hands gently over Warrior, who gradually relaxed under her touch. "She asked me to check in, just in case." "Martha and her hunches," James said, grateful beyond words. "Military nurses develop a sixth sense," Sarah replied. "Or so my father always said. He was a field medic in Vietnam." The personal detail, freely offered without her usual guardedness, didn't escape James's notice. "Thank you for coming, and for setting up tomorrow." Sarah met his eyes directly. "I didn't do it just for you or Warrior. I need to see this Frank Miller for myself, if he is who I think he might be." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to the ring hanging from the chain around her neck. "What aren't you telling me?" James asked, sensing there was more. Sarah hesitated, then pulled a folder from her bag. "The military contact I mentioned, he sent me these yesterday. Records of a German Shepherd designated M87WW deployed to Helmand Province with a Marine unit in 2017. James's pulse quickened as he remembered Frank's words. Marines, Helmand Province, 2017-2018. "The dog's operational name was Warrior," Sarah continued. "He was a bomb detection specialist. Saved his unit multiple times." She pulled out a photograph showing a German Shepherd with familiar markings, standing proudly with his Marine handler, a younger, healthier-looking Frank Miller. "So Frank was telling the truth," James said, conflicted emotions churning inside him. "Warrior was his dog." "Not exactly," Sarah corrected. "Military working dogs aren't personal property. After their service, they're supposed to be properly discharged and adopted through official channels. According to these records, Warrior was reported killed in action after an IED incident that also killed several Marines." "But he obviously wasn't killed," James said, looking at Warrior, who had finally relaxed enough to lie down on his bed, though his eyes remained vigilant. "No," Sarah agreed. "And that's what I can't figure out. How did a dog officially recorded as KIA end up in Frank Miller's personal possession? And more importantly, how did he end up abused and abandoned on an Arizona highway?" The revelation hung between them, raising more questions than it answered. Warrior, the real Warrior, not Rex, had somehow survived an incident that had reportedly killed him, only to endure further trauma. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated," James said, rubbing his face wearily. Sarah nodded, her professional demeanor returning. "I've already called a colleague who specializes in animal behavior. She'll help document Warrior's reactions to Frank. If those reactions indicate fear or trauma responses, it strengthens our case against returning him, regardless of how Frank originally obtained him." That night, after Sarah left, James sat on the floor beside Warrior's bed, gently stroking the German Shepherd's head. The dog had been unusually clingy since Frank's visit, following James from room to room, reluctant to let him out of sight. "I won't let him take you," James promised quietly. "Whatever happened over there, whatever happened here, it's over now. You're safe." Warrior sighed deeply, resting his muzzle on James's knee. The trust in that simple gesture tightened James's throat with emotion. Morning came too quickly. James barely slept, his mind racing with questions about Frank, about Warrior's mysterious past, about what would happen at the clinic. He rose before dawn, taking Warrior for an early walk to burn off their shared nervous energy. The German shepherd seemed to sense the importance of the day, staying unusually close to James's side. As they headed back to the house, James's phone rang, Sarah calling. "Frank Miller is already at the clinic," she said without preamble. "He's drunk, agitated, and making threats. The police are on their way, but I thought you should know before you bring Warrior in." "We'll wait until things calm down," James decided immediately. "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "Come now. I want them to see his behavior, to document it officially. Trust me on this, James." Something in her tone, the urgency, the confidence, made him agree. 30 minutes later, he pulled into the Desert Paws parking lot, Warrior in the back seat. The scene before him was chaotic. Frank's red pickup parked haphazardly across two spaces, two police cruisers with lights flashing, and Frank himself being restrained by officers near the clinic entrance. "Where is he?" Frank was shouting, straining against the officer's grip. "Where's my dog? I know he's in there." Sarah stood in the clinic doorway, her face pale but determined. When she spotted James's truck, she motioned for him to park at the far end of the lot, away from the commotion. As James cut the engine, Warrior began to whine in the back seat, his entire body trembling. The sound of Frank's voice, even at this distance, had triggered an immediate fear response. One of the officers approached James's truck. "Sir, are you James Thornton?" When James confirmed, the officer continued, "You might want to stay in your vehicle until we get this situation under control." Through the windshield, James watched as Frank continued to struggle, his shouting becoming more incoherent. Then, with a sudden surge of strength born of desperation, Frank broke free from the officers and sprinted toward James's truck, his face contorted with emotion. "Rex!" he screamed. "Rex, I know you're in there! I'm sorry, I didn't mean it!" In the back seat, Warrior's whine became a terrified howl. Everything happened in a blur of motion. The officers sprinted after Frank, who was now only yards from James's truck. Warrior's terrified howling escalated, the sound visceral and primal. James instinctively reached back to reassure the dog, his eyes never leaving Frank's desperate approach. "Stay in the vehicle, sir!" an officer shouted. But James was already opening his door, placing himself as a barrier between Frank and Warrior. "Frank, stop!" James commanded, using the same authoritative tone he'd once used with soldiers under his command. "You're making it worse." Frank stumbled to a halt, his momentum carrying him forward until he was just feet from James. Up close, the devastation was unmistakable. Red-rimmed eyes, unwashed hair, the sour smell of alcohol and sleepless nights. "Please," Frank's voice cracked, no longer shouting but broken and pleading. "Please, I just need to see him. I need to tell him I'm sorry." The officers caught up, grabbing Frank's arms. He didn't resist now, his energy seeming to drain away as quickly as it had surged. "Sir, we need to take him in," one officer said to James. "He's created a public disturbance and he appears to be intoxicated." Sarah approached cautiously, her medical bag clutched tightly. "The behavioral specialist is inside," she told James. "We should document Warrior's reaction to Mr. Miller. It's important for the case." James hesitated, torn between protecting Warrior from further trauma and gathering the evidence they might need to keep him safe permanently. How would we do it? Controlled environment, Sarah said. Through the observation window in exam room 3. Warrior won't have to be in the same space as him. The officers were already leading a now subdued Frank toward one of the cruisers. We can give you 15 minutes with him at the station before processing, one offered, if it helps resolve the animal situation. 20 minutes later, they had assembled in an uncomfortable tableau at Desert Paws. Frank sat slumped in a chair in exam room 3, flanked by officers. James and Sarah stood with Warrior in the adjacent room, where a large one-way window allowed them to see Frank without being seen. A woman James hadn't met before, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the behavioral specialist, sat with a clipboard, carefully documenting Warrior's every reaction, and those reactions were undeniable. From the moment Warrior caught Frank's scent, his entire body language transformed. The German Shepherd pressed himself against the far wall, as distant as possible from the observation window. His ears flattened against his skull, and a continuous low growl rumbled in his chest. Most telling were his eyes, wide with recognition and unmistakable fear. Classic trauma response, Dr. Vasquez noted quietly. He recognizes this person as a threat. Through the glass, Frank looked diminished, his earlier aggression replaced with a hollow emptiness. He stared at his hands, occasionally glancing around the room as if searching for something or someone. I need to talk to him, James decided suddenly. Sarah touched his arm. James, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Something about Frank's deflated posture, the familiar signs of a veteran at the end of his rope, compelled James forward. I need to understand what happened. Leaving Warrior with Sarah and Dr. Vasquez, James entered the exam room. Frank's head snapped up at his entrance, hope and desperation flashing across his face before fading into resignation when he saw James was alone. He won't see me, will he? Frank asked, his voice hoarse. James sat in the chair opposite Frank, maintaining a careful distance. No, he's terrified of you, Frank. What happened between you two? Frank's eyes welled with tears. It's not clear anymore. The memories get mixed up. He rubbed his hands over his face. Some days are better than others. When I have Rex, Warrior, with me, the better days outnumber the bad ones. He keeps me grounded. Then why was he covered in cigarette burns? James asked, his voice hardening. Why were there healed fractures that were never properly treated? Frank flinched, as if struck. I don't remember doing that. I swear to God. His voice dropped to a whisper. But sometimes I wake up and things are broken. Sometimes there are gaps, hours, days even, that I can't account for. Blackouts, James said. He'd seen it before in other veterans. PTSD episodes so severe that the mind simply checked out, leaving the body to act on its worst impulses. Frank nodded miserably. The VA doc called it dissociative episodes. Prescribed meds, but they make everything foggy. Can't work, can't drive. He swallowed hard. I thought having Rex back would help me stay stable without the meds. He always could before. Before what, Frank? James pressed, sensing they were approaching something crucial. Frank's gaze went distant, focusing on something only he could see. Before Khyber Pass, before we lost Martinez and Diaz. His breathing quickened. Before Warrior found the secondary device too late. James felt a chill at the operational name. Warrior, not Rex. Tell me what happened in Afghanistan. The story spilled out in disjointed fragments. Frank's unit, a Marine patrol in Helmand Province. Warrior, their bomb detection dog, who had saved them countless times. A routine sweep of a village that went catastrophically wrong. An initial IED that Warrior detected, followed by a secondary device hidden better, designed specifically to catch first responders. Martinez was Warrior's primary handler, Frank explained, tears now flowing freely. They were inseparable. We used to joke that Martinez understood dog language better than English. His face crumpled. He was 2 feet from the secondary when it went off, Diaz too. I was further back. Got knocked unconscious, woke up in the field hospital 3 days later. And Warrior? James prompted gently. They told me he died in the blast too. Frank's voice broke. But then, months later, I saw him at the base in Germany during my medical treatment. He was different, skittish, injured. But it was him. I knew it was him. So you took him? James asked, pieces falling into place. Frank nodded. He recognized me. Came right to me. The handler said he'd been unresponsive since the blast, wouldn't work with anyone new. Frank wiped his face with his sleeve. I was being medically discharged anyway. I convinced them to let me take him home. Forged some paperwork. It wasn't hard. There was so much chaos after the incident, so many records messed up. Did you get treatment when you came back? For either of you? James asked, though he suspected the answer. Started to. The VA was backed up. Was appointments months apart. Then my wife left. Frank's voice drifted off. The nightmares got worse. Started drinking to sleep. That's when the blackouts began. He looked up, desperation in his eyes. I never meant to hurt him. He was the only thing keeping me together. James sat in silence, absorbing the tragedy before him. A man and his dog, both broken by war, both failed by the systems meant to help them heal, locked in a cycle of trauma that had culminated in that terrible moment on the highway. What happened that day on Route 87? James asked finally. Frank's face contorted with the effort of remembering. I was having an episode. Driving somewhere, don't remember where. Something triggered me. A backfiring car, maybe. Suddenly, I wasn't in Arizona anymore. I was back there, in the dust and blood. His hands began to shake. I thought Warrior was one of them, coming to finish us off. He couldn't continue, dissolving into broken sobs. James didn't need to hear more. The picture was devastatingly clear. Frank, lost in a flashback, had attacked the very companion who had once been his lifeline. I need help, Frank whispered when he could finally speak again. I know I can't have him back. Not like this. But I need help, or I won't make it. The raw honesty of the confession hit James like a physical blow. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway, raised voices, urgent footsteps. An officer opened the exam room door. We need to go now, sir. Mr. Miller's sister just called the station. She found something at his house that has us concerned. What? James asked. A suicide note, the officer replied grimly. And it sounds like he has a plan. Frank's face drained of color at the officer's words. Lisa wasn't supposed to come by until tomorrow, he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. His shoulders slumped further, as if this final revelation had removed whatever structural integrity was keeping him upright. The officers moved to escort him out, but James held up a hand. Give us 2 more minutes. Something in his tone, the unmistakable authority of a former Army Ranger, made them pause. Frank? James leaned in closer, lowering his voice. What were you planning to do? Frank wouldn't meet his eyes. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. A bitter smile twisted Frank's mouth. Why? You don't even know me. I know enough, James replied steadily. Afghanistan. PTSD. The feeling that nobody back home can possibly understand. The nights when dying seems easier than remembering. Frank's eyes snapped up, recognition flaring at James's words, the recognition of one survivor seeing another. My cabin, Frank said finally. Up in the Superstition Mountains, remote. No one would find me for weeks. He swallowed hard. I just wanted to see Rex, Warrior, one last time, to tell him I was sorry. Then I was going to go up there and... He didn't need to finish. James understood all too well the allure of a final, quiet exit. He'd contemplated it himself during those first dark months after discharge. The officer stepped forward again, more insistent this time. Sir, we really need to go. We'll take him for a psychiatric evaluation. As they led Frank away, he turned back to James. He was a hero, you know. Saved all of us so many times. He deserved better than what he got. Better than me. After they left, James stood motionless in the exam room, Frank's words echoing in his mind. Through the observation window, he could see Sarah and Dr. Vasquez, still with Warrior, who had finally begun to relax now that Frank's scent was fading from the air. Sarah looked up, sensing his gaze, and came into the exam room. You heard? She asked quietly. James nodded. His sister found a suicide note. Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly, genuine concern showing through. Will they keep him under observation? 72 hours, probably. James ran a hand over his face. It won't be enough. He needs long-term care. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. My military contact sent this while you were talking with Frank. She handed him the phone, opened to an email with attached photos, official military documentation about Warrior. James scanned the documents, his heart sinking further with each paragraph. The full story was even more tragic than Frank had related. Warrior had indeed been presumed killed in the IED attack, but had been found alive hours later, severely wounded. Due to his injuries, he had been deemed unfit for continued service. The protocol should have been rehabilitation and adoption, possibly to Martinez's family or another handler. Instead, there was a gap in the records, followed by an official designation of deceased, filed 3 months after the incident. By then, Frank had apparently already taken him out of Germany. Frank was right about one thing, James said, scrolling through the documents. The administrative chaos after that incident was substantial. Multiple casualties, international transfers of wounded, equipment losses. Someone dropped the ball on Warrior's case and Frank exploited that. But why file him as deceased later? Sarah asked, frowning. Easier than admitting they lost track of a military asset, James surmised. Or maybe Frank had an accomplice who helped clean up the paperwork. He continued reading, then stopped abruptly at a name in the incident report. Sarah, look at this. He pointed to the list of wounded personnel evacuated alongside Frank Miller. Sarah leaned in, her eyes widening as she read the name. Lieutenant Michael Mitchell. Any relation? James asked softly. Sarah's hand went to the ring on her necklace. My fiancé. He was the unit's commanding officer. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled slightly. He died of his injuries 3 weeks later in Germany. The revelation hung in the air between them, the final connection that bound all their stories together. James, the soldier who'd survived his war physically intact but emotionally shattered. Frank, broken in body and mind, who'd stolen a dog in a desperate bid for salvation. Sarah, the woman who'd lost her future to the same incident. And Warrior, the military dog who had survived it all, carrying the unseen scars of his service. "Did you know?" James asked. "When you first treated Warrior?" Sarah shook her head. "Not at first. I suspected he might be a military dog from his behavior and the tattoo, but I didn't make the connection to Michael's unit until I started researching his records." She took a deep breath. "By then I was already involved, already cared too much to walk away." James understood completely. The same invisible threads had ensnared him from the moment he'd spotted Warrior on the roadside. It wasn't chance that had brought them together. It was the long, devastating ripple effects of that single moment in Afghanistan, effects that continued to shape their lives years later and thousands of miles away. "We need to talk to Frank's sister," James decided. "Find out more about his situation, his treatment history. And we need to see whatever he wrote in that note." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Warrior remained at Desert Paws under Sarah's care, while James met with Frank's sister, Lisa Miller, a tired-looking woman in her 40s who had been trying to support her brother from Phoenix while raising 2 teenagers in Tucson. "He's been spiraling for months," she told James over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "The VA psychiatrist adjusted his meds back in January, and things seemed better for a while. Then he stopped taking them." "Because of the side effects?" James asked, remembering Frank's complaints about feeling foggy. Lisa nodded. "He said he couldn't function, couldn't work. He was trying to hold down a job as a night security guard, the only thing he could manage with his PTSD triggers." She twisted her coffee cup anxiously. "When Rex, or Warrior, I guess, disappeared, I knew it was bad. That dog was his lifeline." "Did he tell you what happened that day?" "Not directly, but I found this in his cabin when I went looking for him yesterday." She handed James a spiral notebook, its pages filled with Frank's increasingly erratic handwriting. "It's like a journal. The last few entries are disturbing." James read through the final pages, his stomach tightening. Frank had documented his descent with chilling clarity, the increasing flashbacks, the decision to stop medication, the terrifying blackouts during which he would wake up to find evidence of violence he couldn't remember committing. The entry from the day Warrior disappeared was fragmented, the writing itself a visual representation of Frank's fractured mental state. Backfire, gunshots, ambush. Get down, get down. The dog is acting strange. Enemy handler. Blood everywhere. Martinez down. Drove. Where am I? Highway? Dog gone. Blood on my hands. What have I done? What have I done? What have I done? The final entry, dated just 2 days ago, was calmer but infinitely more disturbing in its clarity. Found Rex. They renamed him Warrior, his real name. Fitting. He's alive, because he is a warrior. Survived me, survived the war. I don't deserve him back, don't deserve anything. Lisa will be better off without the burden. Parents, too. The cabin is ready, so am I. Just need to see him once more, say goodbye, tell him it wasn't his fault. None of it was his fault. "Have the police seen this?" James asked, closing the notebook. Lisa nodded. "That's why they're keeping him on suicide watch. But what happens after the 72 hours? They'll release him, and we'll be right back where we started." "Maybe not," James said, an idea forming. There might be another option. By the time James returned to Desert Paws, Sarah had completed her own investigation, reaching out to veterinary colleagues who specialized in treating service animals with PTSD. "It's more common than people realize," she told him as they sat in her office, Warrior dozing at their feet. "Military dogs experience trauma just like human soldiers do. They can have flashbacks, anxiety, hypervigilance, all the classic PTSD symptoms. So Warrior and Frank were both triggering each other, James realized. Each one's trauma responses setting off the others. Sarah nodded. It's called mutual triggering. In human relationships, it often happens with couples where both partners have PTSD. With handler-dog teams, it can create a devastating cycle. What's the treatment? Separation, initially. Both need to stabilize independently. Then careful, controlled reintroduction, if appropriate. Sometimes it isn't. She looked down at Warrior. In this case, I don't think it would ever be safe for them to be together unsupervised. Frank's blackouts are too unpredictable, and Warrior's fear response to him is too profound. James shared what he'd learned from Lisa and the journal entries. Sarah listened intently, her clinical detachment softening into genuine concern. He needs long-term residential treatment, she concluded. The kind the VA should provide, but rarely does with the necessary consistency. That's what I've been thinking about, James said. The job I applied for at the VA, the Veterans Outreach Coordinator, it's perfect timing. If I get it, I could help navigate the system for Frank, make sure he gets the care he needs. And Warrior? Sarah asked, though she likely already knew the answer. James looked down at the sleeping German shepherd who had become the center of his world in just 6 short weeks. I can't imagine my life without him now, he admitted. He's given me a purpose again. Sarah's expression softened further. You've given each other purpose. That's the remarkable thing about healing. Sometimes we find it by helping others heal. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the psychiatric unit where Frank was being held. He was asking to speak with them, both of them. An hour later, they sat across from Frank in a sterile hospital consultation room. He looked marginally better, showered in clean scrubs with 72 hours of forced sobriety bringing clarity to his eyes. But the underlying exhaustion remained etched in his face. I've been talking with the doctors here, Frank began without preamble. They think I should commit myself to inpatient treatment, 6 months minimum. That sounds like a good idea, Frank, James said carefully. There's a VA facility in Tucson with a specialized PTSD program. My sister lives there. She could visit. Frank swallowed hard. But I need to know Warrior will be okay first. I need to know he has a home. James and Sarah exchanged glances. He does, James assured him. With me. Frank nodded, relief and grief warring on his face. I want to formally surrender him to you. No more legal fights, no more animal services. He deserves stability. He hesitated, then added, and I need to know someone will check on me. Make sure I'm actually getting better, not just warehoused in some facility. The request surprised James that Frank would trust him, of all people, with this responsibility. I will, he promised. We both will. Why? Frank asked, echoing his question from the day before. Why would you help me after what I did? Sarah answered before James could. Because we were all there, Frank. Not physically, but we're all connected to what happened that day in Afghanistan. Her hand went to the ring on her chain. My fiancé was your commanding officer, Lieutenant Michael Mitchell. Frank's face transformed with shock and recognition. Mitchell? You're his... He couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by the connection. I didn't know. He talked about you all the time, showed us your picture. Tears welled in his eyes. He saved my life that day, you know. Pulled me back right before the second blast. The revelation hit Sarah visibly, her composed exterior cracking to reveal the grief she'd carried for 6 years. That sounds like him, she whispered. In that moment, something shifted between the three of them, a recognition of the invisible threads that had bound their fates together long before they'd met. Warrior, sensing the emotional current in the room, rose and moved to Sarah's side, resting his head gently against her leg in a gesture of comfort. "We'll help you, Frank," James said with newfound conviction. "All of us together. That's how we honor those we lost, by helping each other heal." 6 months later, on a crisp November morning, James stood in his backyard, watching Warrior race across the grass. The German Shepherd's three-legged gait had evolved into a fluid, graceful movement, distinct from a four-legged run but no less effective. His coat gleamed in the autumn sunlight, healthy and thick where once it had been matted with blood and dirt. "I think he's actually faster now," Martha commented from her seat on James's patio. At 73, her arthritis had worsened with the approaching winter, but she still insisted on joining their weekend gatherings. "Lighter on his feet. The physical therapist says he's redistributed his muscle mass," Sarah explained, emerging from the house with a tray of coffee mugs. She'd let her hair grow longer over the months, sometimes wearing it loose instead of in her former severe style. Today it fell in soft waves around her face. "His remaining front leg has nearly twice the strength it did before." James accepted a mug from her, their fingers brushing in a casual intimacy that still sent warmth through him. So much had changed since that fateful evening on the highway. He'd gotten the VA job, starting just in time to help facilitate Frank's transfer to the Tucson facility. The position utilized skills he hadn't known he possessed, navigating bureaucracy, advocating for veterans who couldn't advocate for themselves, building bridges between military and civilian systems. For the first time since leaving the Army, he felt he was serving a purpose again. Sarah had expanded her practice to include a dedicated program for service animals with PTSD, with Warrior as her unofficial ambassador. Her walls, professional and personal, had gradually lowered as she allowed herself to speak openly about Michael, to share his memory rather than guarding it like a secret wound. Warrior, for his part, had blossomed. The trembling, distrustful creature James had found on the roadside had transformed into a confident, affectionate companion. He still had his moments. Certain sounds would send him scurrying under the bed, and he remained wary of strangers, especially men with loud voices. But those episodes grew fewer with each passing month, and today they were expecting a visitor. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. Warrior's ears perked up, but he showed none of the terror that had once accompanied unexpected arrivals. James went to answer, knowing who he would find. Frank Miller stood on the porch, nearly unrecognizable from the desperate, broken man of 6 months ago. He'd gained healthy weight. His face had lost the hollow look of chronic insomnia, and his eyes, while still carrying shadows, met James's directly. "Right on time," James said, extending his hand. Frank shook it firmly. "VA punctuality. Some habits stick." He held up a covered dish. "Lisa made sweet potato casserole. Said I couldn't come empty-handed to Thanksgiving." James ushered him inside. They had discussed this visit extensively, with Frank's doctors, with Sarah, with the animal behaviorist who had continued to work with Warrior. Everyone agreed that a controlled reunion, now that both Frank and Warrior had stabilized, would be beneficial for closure. Sarah greeted Frank with professional warmth, and Martha with her grandmotherly directness. "You look better," she informed him after a critical once-over. "Still too skinny, but better." Frank actually smiled. A small one, but genuine. "The food's better in Tucson, and my sister keeps sending care packages." The true test came when Frank stepped onto the back patio. Warrior, who had been playing with his favorite ball, froze. His nostrils flared as he caught Frank's scent, and his body tensed. Everyone held their breath. Frank knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He'd rehearsed this moment with his therapist, understanding that Warrior's reaction, whatever it might be, was valid and deserved respect. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "It's okay. I'm not the same person anymore." Warrior remained frozen for long moments, his amber eyes fixed on Frank. Then, with deliberate caution, he approached. Not with the enthusiasm he showed James or the comfortable familiarity he had with Sarah, but without fear. He stopped several feet away, assessing. Frank made no move to touch him, to force interaction. He simply remained kneeling, patient, accepting whatever decision Warrior would make. After what seemed an eternity, Warrior closed the final distance. He sniffed Frank's outstretched hand, then his sleeve, then, most telling, the place where Frank's own dog tags hung beneath his shirt. Recognition flickered in the dog's intelligent eyes. "He remembers you," James said quietly. "The you from before." Frank nodded, tears welling. "I remember him too. The real him, not the twisted version I saw during the episodes." His voice caught. "I'm so sorry, Warrior. For everything." The German shepherd regarded Frank solemnly, then did something none of them had expected. He sat directly in front of Frank and raised his remaining front paw, offering the military shake command that Frank had undoubtedly taught him years ago. Frank carefully took the offered paw, his tears now flowing freely. "You're a better man than me, buddy," he whispered. The moment hung suspended in time, a silent exchange of forgiveness between two battle-scarred survivors, before Warrior gently withdrew his paw and returned to James's side. The Thanksgiving meal that followed was unlike any James had experienced. Martha's dining table, transported to his house for the occasion, groaned under the weight of traditional dishes. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Frank's progress in the treatment program, Sarah's expanding practice, James's successes at the VA, and Martha's new volunteer position teaching art to seniors at the community center. "To second chances," Sarah proposed as they raised their glasses in a toast. She wore Michael's ring on her finger now rather than around her neck, not as a symbol of what she had lost, but as a reminder of what she had found. "To chosen family," Martha added, her weathered hand squeezing James's. "To Warrior," Frank said, his voice steady as he looked at the German shepherd resting comfortably between James and Sarah's chairs. "The best of us all." As evening settled over Phoenix, they moved to the patio with coffee and Martha's homemade apple pie. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Warrior lay in the center of their small circle, occasionally accepting gentle pets from each human present, including briefly Frank. James watched the scene with a fullness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. This improvised family, formed from the broken pieces of tragedy and chance, had become more real to him than any conventional definition of home. "You know," Martha said, breaking a comfortable silence, "my Herbert always said that family isn't about who you're born to, but who you die for." She looked around the circle meaningfully. "And more importantly, who you live for." As darkness fell, Warrior rose and moved deliberately to the edge of the patio. In the distance, a coyote howled, a sound that once would have triggered his anxiety. Now he listened, alert but unafraid, before turning back to his humans, with what could only be described as contentment in his amber eyes. 3 legs, 1 heart, whole at last. When life leaves us broken on life's roadside, sometimes the most unexpected companions help us find our way home. Warrior's journey from an abandoned three-legged German shepherd to the heart of a chosen family reminds us that our golden years can be our most meaningful. Like James, Sarah, Martha, and Frank, many of us carry invisible wounds, loss, loneliness, regret. Yet healing becomes possible when we open ourselves to new connections. Their Thanksgiving table, built from shared trauma and mutual support, shows us that family isn't defined by blood, but by who stands beside us when darkness falls. Perhaps you've felt that emptiness, wondering if your best days are behind you. Warrior's story whispers a powerful truth. Wholeness doesn't require perfection. His three-legged race across the lawn, joyful despite what he's lost, mirrors our own potential to find purpose and connection regardless of our scars. Have you found unexpected healing through helping another wounded soul? What three-legged dogs have entered your life when you least expected but most needed them? Share your stories of resilience and chosen family in the comments below. Your experience might be the very light someone else needs to find their way home.